In their heyday, Britain's railway workshops around the country designed various railway wagons that were made in their tens of thousands to carry goods all over the United Kingdom. But how were their identification plates made? For each different wagon plate design, a casting plate, or pattern to give them their correct name, was made and used to cast the individual identity plates in a variety of metals, the most common being cast iron. This is one of the original casting patterns from Darlington Railway Works, which we're going to take to a foundry to see how a cast iron plate is made from it. These two holes were used to insert the appropriate numbers for the weight of each wagon and the year it was made, and this curved long slot at the bottom was used to insert the individual numbers assigned to every wagon. The casting numbers each had backing plates that were the same size and shape, so that whatever combination of numbers were used they could all fit into the slot, and if there were any spaces after putting numbers in place, blank backing plates would be used to fill in the gaps to make it ready for casting. Different railway works varied in their ways of doing the same thing. This Irish CIE Railways casting plate, for example, had a recess that thinner backing plates would slot into, instead of a completely through slot like the E-plate. On this LMS plate, you can see by the finished casting marks how a much narrower backing plate and slot would be used to achieve the same result. And in this Great Western Railway example, you can make out that the numbers sat completely within the borders of the backing plates rather than hanging over the top and bottom like the E-plate numbers. It's also clear where the blank backing plates were used to fill in the spaces, as this plate only had 4 numbers. And this GWR plate used half-size blanking plates at either end, as it has 5 numbers. But the variations in casting methods were numerous, because as you can see with this Eastern Region plate, it shows no casting marks with the numbers at all. To ready the pattern for the kind of casting you can see in this old Railway Works photo, new backing plates and numbers are needed, as it came my way with only 4 large numbers, and the plate is going to feature all zeros to prevent it from ever being passed off as an original relic from railway times past. Using this genuine wagon plate that was made from the Darlington casting pattern over 75 years ago, the large zero is masked off for use as a template using decorating masking tape. Because it's in good condition, it can be left painted, as it should produce a good casting mould template as it is. As for the casting pattern, at some point in its past it has been painted, likely after it was no longer in use at Darlington and the paint has cracked and chipped. So to produce a new cast with clearly defined edges on the characters, it will have to be taken back to bare metal before it goes to the foundry. For now, however, I've cleaned up the letter O in the word tons to make a precise mould for the weight and date numbers, as zeros were often the same size and shape as the letter O on various wagon plates. Masking off the whole word is easier than trying to get tape in the very small gaps between letters, and the wooden blocks are placed behind the tape to keep it vertical so that the silicone rubber used to make casting moulds for the zeros is reasonably well contained when poured out. After weighing the correct ratios of hardener and silicone, they're mixed thoroughly to ensure the silicone dries evenly. When pouring, we need to make sure that the depth of the liquid goes to at least a few millimeters above the height of the characters so that the final mould isn't too thin and will be strong enough to withstand a bit of pulling about without tearing when the castings are removed. Drying time for this silicone is about 5 hours, but it's better to leave it overnight just to make sure that it is properly set, as room temperature can make a difference, as can making any mistakes with the ratios of silicone and hardener. Once enough drying time has passed, the silicone mould is carefully peeled back, which comes away from the plate fairly easily, and we're ready to make the zeros. Framed by a few plates from the collection, which we'll see more of later, I also made a small oblong space from wooden blocks and masking tape to pour silicone into to make the moulds for the backing plates for our zeros, and resting the original casting numbers onto the edges of the blocks so that the numbers sit above the silicone. The backing plates then make an impression into the silicone when it's poured out. Using epoxy resin to make the zeros and backing plates, once it's mixed with hardener it's poured into the dried moulds, and then smoothing the excess liquid off the mould surface ensures a nice flat finish so that the cast zeros will sit well on the backing plates. As you can see, I made a second set of moulds which speeds up getting the resin cast made, but will also compensate for any potential errors in either set, as I can use the best results out of the moulds. Drying time for the epoxy is 24 hours, and the casts are then removed from the moulds, and any finishing off that is needed, such as trimming or sanding excess dried resin, is done so that the zeros are ready to go on the backing plates. Once all the parts needed are made and readied, the large zeros are spaced correctly onto the backing plates and superglued in place. And the smaller zeros for the weight and date are also secured to small wooden backing blocks. After putting all the finished numbers into place on the cleaned up casting plate, it looks like we're now ready to get the cast iron plates made from the pattern. Travelling by train from my home here in North Wales to the Durable Castings Foundry in Deeside, a short journey away, I wonder whether any of the plates in my collection and the wagons they were attached to before they were scrapped had ever run on the same rails that I'm going to travel over now. It's not something I'll ever know, of course, but the thought will accompany me on the journey as I also imagine what it must have been like in steam days gone by. Although I was born a few years before the last steam-hauled trains ran on the British Railways network for the final time on 11th of August 1968, I sadly don't have any recollections of such times, and like so many thousands of other people I content myself with taking occasional visits to heritage railways, or alternatively catch a view of mainline steam excursions which can invoke the nostalgia of what it must have been like in the golden age of steam. And I'm fortunate living where I do, as in the spring and summer months they regularly pass through my local station. One recent visit was by loco 45212 here on the North Wales coast, seen passing through Prestatyn on its way to Holyhead on the 1st of March 2025. And its return journey through the station later that day. Arriving at my final train stop, I wonder how the casting of the plates will turn out, as the casting numbers I have made, which I'm hoping will do the job well, are not exactly Darlington Works originals or to exacting British Railways standards to say the least, but I'll soon find out if they'll result in an acceptable finish. 2 plates are going to be made from the pattern, as was the case back in the day, so that a plate could be attached to each side of a wagon. And inside the foundry the work starts by placing the Darlington pattern into a frame that will contain the moulding sand. A releasing agent called Slipsil is a silicon-based spray that stops sand sticking to the pattern and is sprayed over it to facilitate its removal from the sand once it's set. And then along with the wooden pieces used to make channels where the liquid iron will flow, the frame is filled with sand which is pressed down to ensure it beds into the pattern well, and then the sand is smoothed off the top of the frame. The sand is a refined silica sand which is mixed and bonded using a 2-part phenol resin binder system, which after a few minutes makes it set rock hard. The pattern can then be removed from the mould, which is held by tapping it with a hammer to ease the release, and any excess loose sand particles are removed with a blast of compressed air. The pattern is reinserted and another frame placed over the top to be filled with sand in order to make the other half of the mould, after which the pattern is removed for the final time and the 2 halves of the mould are put together. Sand is again used, this time along the sides, which sets and seals the 2 halves together, and then the 2 moulds are taken to join others in an area where the cast iron will be poured. The metal being poured into a mould combined with the heat causes a lot of pressure which can lift one half of the mould off the other, so the large oblong shaped weights you can see on the top of the moulds are there to counteract this, and the flatter the item, the more pressure is generated compared to more complex objects. After the larger moulds have been filled, the 2 Darlington plate moulds are filled as well. After giving the metal time to set, the finished casts are removed from the moulds, and with the large thicker part still glowing hot, being the channel where the liquid metal entered, they are taken away to cool down. As a point of interest on the technical side of things, cast iron isn't very ductile as the graphite in its matrix is in a flake form, so magnesium ferrosilicon is added when the metal is liquid, which for a short time changes this flake graphite into a sphere which is called iron spheroidal graphite iron, or SG for short. This spheroidal graphite makes the iron become very ductile, so if I accidentally drop the newly cast wagon plates, they won't be brittle like cast iron wagon plates from the past. Once the plates have suitably cooled down, they can be worked on to complete the finishing touches to the finished casts, and the first stage is to remove any excess metal such as the large channel residue, as well as any smaller parts, which is done with a grinder. When the larger pieces are out of the way, any very small bits are seen to more accurately with a sander. For parts that can't be finished off with a sander, such as the plate's bolt holes, a handheld power tool is used to tidy them up, and when the technician is satisfied with the end result, the plates are shot blasted to remove any final residue from the whole process of making plates. Since this video is about how wagon plates were made, it wouldn't have been complete without visiting a foundry and being able to observe the process, so many thanks do go to all the great people at Durable Castings in Deeside who were very helpful and patient with me, answering all my questions, which at times I'm sure seemed quite simplistic. And my gratitude also goes to them for the filming in the foundry. Back at home I now have to decide what to do with the plates. Do I leave them as they are or paint them? Well, I think they look great being newly cast and it's tempting to leave them that way, but in keeping with how things used to be in the past, I've decided to paint one of them up to how it would have looked. Like the plate on the main wagon frame above one of the wheels on this brand new guards van from Darlington works a few decades ago. And if you want to see how the full painting process on plates is done, my video on railway wagon plate restoration will show you how I get the end result. Some old plates, however, can look very appealing after being on a working wagon for a few decades. So what about doing the opposite to how a new plate or restoration would look like and make it appear aged instead? As you can see by some of these examples, there are times when the natural wear and tear due to a long service life can be worth leaving on the plate, depending of course on your preference and the amount of deterioration, so I'm going to give one of the cast plates a similar look, and the aged look can always be removed easily at a later date. Being cast iron, artificially aging it is as simple as putting it in a bucket of water and leaving it there for a while. This is in the bucket after a few hours and some rust is starting to develop, and this is after 16 hours in the water and taken out and left to dry overnight. And it's starting to look as if it could have had a hard life on a wagon for some considerable time, if it wasn't for the Zeros giving it away as an interesting curiosity. With that done, it's time to add it to the other plates. As we take a brief look here at some of the various wagon plates that were made over the decades by different manufacturers, it's easy to see how many different styles and differences in characters there were, and even within individual manufacturers the styles changed over the years. The previous video only showed some of these plates due to house renovation work and plates being in storage, but since the work is nearly complete I've been able to lay plates out here to show the many differences they have, and I hope to have them permanently displayed soon. There are other wagon plates out there somewhere from some manufacturers that are so rare they've either been lost to history or are tucked away in private collections across the country. As a result, there will be some that may never see the light of day or that I'll be fortunate enough to find, but it has still been a fascinating and absorbing hobby to track different ones down over the years, and still provides enough interest to make me wonder what might yet be found tucked away in some dusty corner of an antique or curio shop, or at a swap meet or car boot sale. I hope you've enjoyed this glimpse into how wagon plates were made, and if you're so inclined, I hope when on your travels that you might find yourself coming across some interesting railway item from the past, and you might just find it when you least expect to. Until next time.